Hello, everybody. Welcome to MHTV. We're really delighted to have you with us tonight. We've got a fantastic panel, and we're going to be talking about empathy, and we're talking about theatre, all different kinds of things like that. Before I introduce our lovely guests, though, let me hand you over to Dave so he can tell you how you can join in tonight, because obviously we'd love to hear from your opinions as well. Dave?
Hi everyone. So as always, a couple of ways that you can join in tonight. First is on Facebook Live. Obviously, just head over towards the right. There's the text bar. You can put in any comments, questions, thoughts, and obviously we'll try and feed as many of them in that we can tonight. The other option you've got is if you're on X, if you just head there and use the hashtag MHTV. All our guests are on X, so they'll be able to sort of join in with the conversation after tonight as well. So but without further ado, back to you, Nicky.
Fantastic. So our title tonight is Empathy Machines Using Theatre, and one of our key stars tonight is Pete. So Pete, can you introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hello, Nicky. Thanks for having me. I'm Pete Carruthers. I'm a writer, actor, director, producer, working in short films and theatre. Been doing that for about 10-15 years now. I'd say I'm a mental health enthusiast rather than a professional. I can't point to any qualifications, but I'm also a PhD student at UCLan, and my thesis title is Empathy Machines, which is fitting, the use of film and theatre in the training of compassionate and reflective health professionals, which I can now say without even looking at it. So it's well battered in there now.
Fantastic. Let's come to some other long-term friends. Anne, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me here. I'm Anne Felton. I'm a mental health nurse academic, currently working at Nottingham Trent University, running their health department. And I've been involved with Pete in terms of some of the work he's done around theatre, and both in terms of I guess, participating, viewing the play, and having the opportunity for some of our students to experience it as well.
Fantastic. And Mick?
Hi, I'm Mick McKeown. I'm Professor of Democratic Mental Health at the University of Central Lancashire in Preston, and I'm helping to supervise Pete's PhD by portfolio along with John Gadsby at Birmingham City University. And similarly to Anne, being very, well, for some time really been involved in trying to help support Pete, get resources behind what he's doing, and also been in and out of facilitated processes that he's done to get to inform the writing of his theatre piece. So that's been really interesting.
Absolutely. So I think probably the best place for us to start then would be to get a bit of an understanding of the scope of what you're doing, Pete. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in terms of I'll start off with the film work actually, because that kind of gives the context for it. So I was quite late coming to the arts. I was in the military for several years, and I was an engineer for 10 years in total, then retrained as an actor, and then started, when I left drama school, I started to create my own work, write my own short film scripts and plays. But the first film that I made was one called Fallout, and it was a 10-minute, really tiny 10-minute short film about a military veteran with PTSD. And it was very much just a passion project. Let's just see if I can do this. And it did really well. Someone found it who was a mental health nursing lecturer at Edge Hill and asked if she could use it for her to show her students what the reality of PTSD was like. And that was really reassuring to hear that's what she thought it did. And so obviously I was delighted for her to do that. It went down really well, then started to spread to other universities, and then started to be used in the NHS to train staff. And since then, it's actually been used all over the world somehow in 5 different continents. It's just really taken off. So then I started to get invited to conferences to show it and to talk about my work, and then started to get commissioned by the NHS to make a couple more films, always about veterans and mental health at this point. And started to feel like I'd found a bit of a niche that I was quite enjoying and I was quite fascinated by. But then, so that's been kind of ongoing for about 10-15 years, I'd say. But the play, the theatrical play that I've been working on, that's been the baby that I've been working on pretty much since drama school. Yeah. And the question that asks is, who is normal and who gets to decide? And that was kind of the seed of it. And I've been working on that through different drafts and different iterations of it since then, and been quite passionate about having people with lived experience to contribute to it, and people who work in mental health, and also students who are studying to be mental health nurses, and we've had other health fields as well, to kind of have that collaborative approach to it at every stage. And thankfully, we've been through a few, 2 different R&D phases. Mick's been involved pretty much for the last 7 years now, I think, Mick. And then thankfully we had some funding from UCLan and from Health Education England last year, and we were eventually able to put the play on. And part of that was we were able to bring student nurses to see the play, and they would watch the play, and they would take part in a Q&A discussion after the play as well, with guest experts on the panel. Mick and Anne were on there as well, a few of them as well. And that counted as practice for them, as sort of placement hours for them. And it's gone down really, really well. The feedback we had was fantastic, and thankfully it's funding dependent. It's got a hell of a life ahead. It looks like it's picking up steam, and there's some quite exciting stuff happening.
Yeah, there's loads of things to look at from what you're saying. I guess simulation and simulated practice, something we're going to come on and talk a bit more about later on. But I guess it's really interesting to dig into, you using the words of empathy and compassion a lot. What do you think the need is for that? Why particularly focus on that area?
Yeah, I think it's one where the last thing I want to do is sort of make some sort of insinuation that mental health professionals haven't already got empathy or compassion. Of course they do, but I think there's always room for more of it. And I think that what we've constantly had fed back to us through showing the film and through the films that I've done in the play is that you get that sense of going on that journey to spend some time in that character's shoes, to really feel what it feels like, and see the kind of the truth of it from that side, from the inside, I suppose. And I suppose that comes through from, that was something that I loved about acting when I first found acting. It was my ability to understand people by stepping into their shoes and spending some time with them. So that's what I think it does. The term empathy machines came from a quote that I found by a famous film critic called Roger Ebert. And he's people will probably have heard of him. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but he's renowned as like the biggest film critic of all time, and one of the best. But he said, movies are the most powerful empathy machine in all the arts. When I go to a great movie, I can live somebody else's life for a while. I can walk in someone else's shoes. I can see what it feels like to be a member of a different gender, a different race, a different economic class, to live in a different time, to have a different belief. And I think that also applies to theatre. Obviously, that's my speciality before I kind of came to film, really. So I do both. And I think it just does something different. I think Mick's said in a couple of the Q&As that we've had after the play is it moves people. And I think sometimes that word move can kind of be downplayed. People think, oh, it was moving, we perhaps we got a bit upset, or we had some tears or whatever. But I think it's more than that. I think it's about engaging that sort of heart and head, and actually moving someone from one belief to another in a short period of time is something that's quite powerful, that I think it's difficult to do with more traditional methods, I think, and it's something that the arts done well have that kind of power to do that.
Yeah, I think you're stopping it from being a static learning experience, aren't you? I think that's really exciting. I wondered if there was anything that Anne or Mick wanted to add on the idea of kind of the importance of empathy or compassion in sort of nurse education.
Yeah, I think, I'm sure you've discussed in some of your other episodes some of the challenges of really prioritising some of those areas in terms of nurse education, that there are some real difficulties, I think, with all the things that we need to cover in curriculum around the sort of presence of mental health. And these are fundamental skills for all nurses, but particularly for mental health, and areas that it can be harder to really grapple with how you support students to develop those. I think, as Pete's highlighted, that there are those embedded kind of beginning points that people have that help them come into the professions in the first place, but it's about how you really grow and develop that, and particularly with people who might have certain types of experiences. And I think that's a particular power within Pete's work. The journey that you go on with the characters and the kind of experiences that they have, it's incredibly powerful and offers something quite different, which, obviously professionals have many skills, but the creative side and bringing that professional creative approach to the learning experience is a fantastic opportunity.
Definitely. Mick?
Yeah, if I can just come in there. Yeah, I mean, all of the above, obviously. And I think there's also this thing about, a wider sort of field of creative arts is a way to, for me, things like, some education is a bit boring. There's PowerPoint presentations, and there's reading books, and there's reading journal articles that aren't always written to engage people's interest. I'm including some of my own work here, and you put someone in front of a piece of theatre or a really decent movie that deals with, not just mental health themes, but the whole drama of human life. And I think there is something about the way that will touch people in a way that, say, non-creative approaches, dry sort of theory, or even with the best will in the world, good educative mainstream processes mightn't have that power. I think we can do all of these things, but I think we need at least some of these sort of things. And I think there's a safety in this as well. You can expose people to real life, which we do in nurse education. Sometimes that's a bit risky, and what you do if you're upset or you have a sort of reflexive reaction to somebody else that isn't what the textbook is looking for. Where do you go with that? Whereas in watching a movie or being immersed in a piece of theatre, you can have all these sort of raw emotional reactions, and like Pete said, it's not just the emotion; it's an effective component of cognitive learning as well as this. I think did Pete say sort of heart and mind together. But it's all safe. You're in the theatre, you're watching a movie, there's some distance between you and the thing that's provoking these reactions. And there's obviously time set aside later to reflect on this stuff, talk about it and discuss. And I would say, and I'm not just saying this because we're on MHTV now, but some of the discussions we've had after Pete's theatre piece has been as deep a learning I've ever seen students engage with. Certainly, I mean, in some of my lessons, people are literally asleep, and I'm not exaggerating, but here people are like dynamically engaged, and they're not fearful of coming in with a really important question, and they're then engaging with each other. I think the whole thing provokes lots and lots of pause for thought in terms of what are we actually doing educatively, and I think that's part of what Peter is studying in his PhD as well. And I think there's not just the theatre; there's going to be this meta learning on top about how to make the most of these sort of opportunities.
I think you make some really interesting points there as well, about the experience of being a student. It can be quite intimidating for a lot of people. And the idea of like sticking your hand up and saying something in a class and learning how to take in information and structure it is a skill that maybe people can be quite anxious about. But if this century has taught us how to do anything, it's how to watch, isn't it? It's how to participate and care about movies, films, theatres, things like that require you to be engaged, but they take the onus off you to be doing things. So it's responsive, but it's not putting the spotlight on you. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because then it lets people have space for a think as well. And I guess the other thing that struck me, and I'm thinking back about my own nursing education, was the emphasis on being professional was about not having emotions, not using my emotions appropriately. It was like, you don't talk back to voice hearing, you don't ask about, you don't show vulnerability, you don't show weakness, you don't, and I think about how that limited me as a practitioner at the start of my career, and also how it did a disservice to people who needed me to be able to respond to them, because I genuinely thought that being a good mental health nurse was like having a complete face of calm in the face of, like, you know, fire, drama, you know, sadness, other people's tears, and just not, and that made me better at my job, and I think it made me worse at my job at the start. And I think what Pete, what you're doing there is really interesting in terms of almost helping people to learn how to use their emotions appropriately, because we all have them, don't we? And if we don't tend to them, if we don't have space to talk stuff out, it's just going to be defeat. It's going to end in defeat for everybody.
I think it's about saying to students, look, you know, it's helping them to sit there and empathize, to connect, to recognize with the characters on stage and go, yeah, that's a bit of me. Yeah, I do that. I've done that. I've recognized that. And that's what we try to do is, you know, we've got some characters that have some symptoms that you might think are quite unusual. So one of them is a voice hearer. Another one has synesthesia, which is, you know, not very well understood. But we do it in a way that there's ways that people can recognize little bits of that and connect and go, oh, I can see myself experiencing that now. And I think what it does is it helps students to not only recognize that their feelings, their worries, their concerns, their even traumas, you know, the stuff that they're bringing to their professional career beforehand, or even, you know, during it, isn't just okay, it's important, you know, and it's important to understand that and to understand what value that has as well, to have that literal understanding, that knowledge of what patients are going through. And I think that's the whole thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mick and Anne, but that's, I think, an important part of what it does. We've had you know, quite a few students share that, you know, they have got lived experience of the themes explored in the written feedback and in the verbal stuff as well, you know, the chats that we've had afterwards, and talked about it being empowering and saying that they feel seen and they feel less alone. So that's another important part of it for me, I think.
I really like the idea as well. I mean, I think as well, another thing, going back to how education has changed, in that it was very much them and us, instead of, exactly as Mick is saying, talking about the human experience. You know, we shouldn't be concentrating on, like, oh, well, I don't technically hear voices, so I can't understand that. It's like, I know what it's like to be scared. I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed or afraid or not able to ask for help. So I do have connections to this person that I can use and I can help. And I think that's really exciting work that you're doing there. Sorry, Mick, I think I interrupted you. You were going to say something?
No, I think I was interrupting you, but I think there's obviously, you know, we're dwelling at the moment on sort of occupational education and learning, but I think this is a play in its own right, and it has been seen and deserves to be seen by the public at large. And then you're on other territory, like Pete's saying there about, you know, the you know, the, if you like, the normalcy of this spectrum of experience, and the way in which thinking about things in those terms can defeat this sort of, you know, detrimental effects of stigma and such like. And so I think there's a whole broader audience for this that's everybody, but tonight we're thinking very particularly about you know, nurse trainees in particular, but maybe not even just nurse trainees, or, you know, other professional groups as well.
I think there's a related point there, Mick, as well, that I was thinking the first time I saw the play live was the first play I'd seen since the pandemic and since lockdown. And I think that probably amplified my emotional kind of reaction to it, really, and getting immersed again in the joy of you know, the joy and the challenge of that kind of emotional experience. And then I reflected afterwards around, you know, the accessibility of that for some of our students who may be studying or living places where they don't, you know, where there isn't the opportunity to see that kind of art, and, you know, and the wider cultural perhaps benefits that might also offer.
Absolutely. I think, Dave, you've got some questions there coming through.
Yeah, I suppose quite as simple as in it's not many words to it. Question is, can a play be any good if you don't learn something from it?
You're on.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. You could turn that back and say, if you've not learnt anything from a good play, I don't know. Which
Go on.
comes first,
Hey,
chicken and
maybe
egg?
it's on you,
If
Dave.
you've not learned something, have you been open to learning something? You know, perhaps something to reflect on. I think something could just be funny. It can be something familiar, something you've seen produced a dozen times before, and you can enjoy it. Because I think that's another thing that we've perhaps. I mean, Anne was kind of touching on it there, I suppose, is that there's another element of you just get a nice well-being hit, you know, from watching live theatre, from engaging in art. I think I saw a headline today somewhere that was just talking about how we've lost that understanding that engagement with art is just good for us, you know, for our mental health, and you know, just going and watching something that is good, even if you don't come away challenged, or you know, your mind turned upside down on a certain subject that you didn't understand before. I don't think that it has to be that. I think that's just where I get excited about that kind of work. I suppose that's what I'm about. But I'm quite happy to go and watch a silly comedy and enjoy that and say that is good. And yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm floundering here.
I don't think you are. I think he gave you a bad question. You handled it very well.
Yeah. I mean, maybe another route into it, Pete, is, you know, we've talked about the empathy side of things and how this sort of learning might bolster people's compassion and that side of things. But I think your play strikingly has got issues in it, and some of them, for, you know, people will make different sense of these, and that's entirely okay, which is another valuable, you know, character of this sort of stuff, is we don't have to look for a consensus opinion on the piece. In fact, it's probably even better if it provokes different opinions, and we can discuss and debate those civilly. But I think, you know, from my point of view, looking at your play, and I think I've seen it lots and lots of times, there's always something new in there, you know, and there's so that this idea of learning is a continuous thing, I think, with theatre, and it may be that we even have epiphanies when we are exposed to something else, but we remember this play or other moments of learning, and we make those connections, and it deepens the learning. But I think the issue stuff was really interesting for me, because it, you know, and obviously you've written these in, but you've done it, I think, really cleverly, which is, you know, I think sometimes academics like myself, we think we're clever and we have these clever credentials, you know, like doctor this, that, and the other. But we haven't got that talent, I don't think. Now, some of us maybe, but I certainly haven't. The talent to actually tell a story in a staged, you know, the staging is important, but the story advances through dialogue. I think that's an incredibly skillful thing to do. Obviously, there's a visual element to it, but it's what these people are saying to each other moves the story along. And I think that's a really different way of stimulating people to think about stuff. And I think the good writers, and I'm counting you in this, Pete, they leave enough space for people to actually come to their own critical disposition to it, and that lingers. You know, it sort of lingers afterwards, and ideas come to us even after we've discussed it with other people. And I think all of these opportunities for learning they're not just latent in the thing; they're designed into it. You've done that as a playwright, and I think it's an incredible gift to put in front of students. And one of my frustrations has been we haven't always filled the halls, even when we've offered this free, you know, fantastic piece of work to people. There's something about modern university life for me where people don't always turn up for stuff, and I think that's a shame, you know. And it's something that's not about this play, by the way. I think it's about what's going on in terms of what we've done to the culture of learning in universities, and whether we've, you know, battered student nurses into a point of oblivion, you know. But that wider discussion probably for another day. But I do think there's the emotional stuff in there, which is great, and that's inescapably about learning. So it's about learning about ourselves. But there's this issue-based stuff that can just go on and on. There's so many things in this play about restrictive practice, the idea that, you know, is the purpose of psychiatry to help people, or is it to control behavior that vexes other people? You know, what's going on in people's interpersonal relationships that speaks of control, dominance, and all this sort of stuff. It's all there in this play, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, we've got a tweet.
I suppose just on that point, that the kind of thread of what you're saying there, Mick. I think one of the things sort of saying, the skills of a producer, writer, actor, can sometimes sort of be, really important in terms of the learning environment, different to the kind of academic skills that you've got. And I suppose that kind of question about, there needs to be a certain component to be able to become a nurse. You have to do so many hours. You have to do so many hours in certain different things. Is it that we need to be saying more about, looking at these new ways of learning, because actually they do enrich people's development and maybe do it in a way that's so much more beneficial?
I say absolutely, and I might be jumping ahead in terms of sort of a theme that I know that we wanted to pick up on around simulation, which is obviously something, hugely promoted in terms of healthcare professionals learning, hugely valuable, but tends to be seen in a certain way. And I think often, particularly with the sort of technology that's available around mannequins kind of approach, and what's really, really exciting, I think, is the opportunities to consider creative approaches as that experiential kind of practical simulated learning opportunity. And I think there has to be more space for this kind of approach. And perhaps, I think, as you were saying, Nicky, in terms of what's been lost perhaps in education and Mick over the years is actually the space for the arts and more creativity, as some of it being about the directives and the direction they're at, but some of it also being about logistics in terms of space, numbers, all of those kind of things. And I think it's there's no question about the depth of learning that can be gained from these type of approaches, and there's perhaps an opportunity for us, quite a critical opportunity at the moment, to think about, can we link it with some of the key agendas, and that, because of the immersive nature of the play, and the prompt that has for you to kind of connect with those characters, that could we link it with those kind of learning approaches like simulation?
I think you're talking about some really interesting things there as well. Before we go into the simulation thing, although it's a really interesting point you make about mannequins, it seems to be pretty easy for most universities to stump up the cash for mannequins, but when it comes to commissioning things like this, it's a little bit harder to get them to see that there's financial incentive for that, in terms of learning. We've got a tweet from Ali, or an ex from Ali, I don't know what you call them anymore, but saying, describing you as an absolute legend. So let's just get that on the record, Pete. Saying, I can attest to how much learning, reflection, and takeaways there are from an excellent written and executed production. And I guess what I would, just throw open to everyone is, so you watch this amazing piece of theatre, this amazing piece of art, and then you were describing having kind of space to talk about it afterwards. So how's that facilitated? How's that part managed?
So that, I think, is still the bit that we're developing, and we've tried different approaches through the film work that I've done and the play. I suppose with the play so far, it's basically been, we've watched the play. It's been an interval in the play, because it's a long one. It's over 2 hours long, and then we've given the audience sort of 10-15 minutes to just kind of stretch the legs, and then we'll come back and have a good 40 minutes at least to talk about it. And we've had really interesting expert panelists. So we've had academics and lecturers such as Anne and Mick. We've had Health Education England, NHS England managers. We've had, but I think most importantly, sorry, Mick and Anne, is the people with that lived experience and who, particularly those that have helped to contribute towards the work, so people who have that experience of hearing voices, of synesthesia, of autism, that have helped us to make sure that it's not just accurate, but that it's sensitive and it's measured, and presented in an empowering way. So, and then we've just kind of left it, I suppose, fairly unstructured, really, just to give it that space to breathe, for students to bring what they want to talk about, and not just students. We've had health professionals as well, and general theatre audiences as well. We've got a really nice mixture in there as well, and we just sort of see where it goes, really. And that's really exciting for me, because it's different every time. And as Mick said, people get different things from it every time, and every performance feels different. You'll sense an audience reacting to a certain bit of the play that didn't the night before, and then that can sometimes come up in the discussion afterwards, that someone's really connected with a certain moment of it. But I think just going back to, I just wanted to pick on what you said about, the funding element of it. And it's not about, kind of beating a drum for it, but I think it's about, there's a wider cultural thing in terms of what we value. And I think with the arts, it's quite often seen as a nice to have. It's like, oh, it'd be lovely if we could, and if we can maybe put something on at the end of the day, or if we've got a bit of money to spend in March before the end of the year, then we can chuck that at a local theatre company and put something together. But it's very, very hard to get people to believe in it enough to make it a core element, to make it something that's got some longevity to it, and be part of the structure. And that's what I think we're driving towards, to show that it's not just that it can do that, and in an effective way, that it sometimes in some ways does it better than traditional ways as well. So that's where the ambition is, I think.
So you're building an evidence base at the moment, is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. There is, obviously I'm doing a PhD with Mick as my supervisor, and gone through some of the literature that's already there, and there's bits and bats about how theatre can create empathy, and also how it's been used in education, and very little around nurse education, in particular mental health nurse education, but there's little bits there. But obviously what I'm doing with the PhD is to try and build a greater evidence base for it, and that's ongoing. So there's the next, through the next stage of the project, it's not something that's finished. We'll be keeping that coming. Very qualitative, which is my preferred way of researching and analysing. So it's fantastic, because I'm learning all the time as well, and I'm learning how to improve my practice. So that this PhD is just going to be a snapshot, I suppose, for me to keep then learning and analysing and creating that evidence as we go forwards. But I think we're getting to the point where people are satisfied that we've got enough, that it's worth listening to, and considering having a more a more formal kind of attachment to it.
So what's the next steps then? Tell us about that.
So the main thing I've been focusing on for the last year or so now, actually, since not long after we finished the tour, is because it went really well, and the conversations that we had afterwards, the discussions were really effective. And it was essentially half a day. It was about 3 or 4 hours of a student's day, and then that was it, really. There was possibly a little bit of extra reflection in an extra lesson somewhere else, but there was a sense from talking to people like Anne and Mick and about how can we make this a bit bigger, or how can we really get into the play and some of the stuff that comes up within it. And then obviously there was conversations with Health Education England, who are now NHS England, obviously, about the need to create more simulated placement opportunities, partly because of the new long-term workforce plan, but existing pressures already. And could it fit that? And it fit really well, because a lot of the feedback we were getting were things that were coming through saying it was like real life. It was real life experience delivered in a safe environment. We were hearing that from students and from qualified clinicians and lecturers. And it was like, this seems like a good place to go with it. And not only because, in the real world, we need to fund it as well. And there was potentially some funding there as well to help us get this to students. So that's what we've been working on in terms of how we can develop this work and develop a wraparound package with the play and some of the films that I've done as well, that can be used as a simulated practice experience for nurses. So it's been a tough job. It feels like some days it feels like you're pushing an open door, and then some days it feels like they all close. But we're getting to the point now where I think we've addressed a lot of the barriers that have come up. I think one of the biggest concerns was, how is this going to fit the NMC guidance on simulation? That's what I was hearing from a lot of simulation leads at various universities. They couldn't get it in their heads how this would work, how this would fit that. So I've done a lot of work here with Jonathan Gadsby, particularly on helping to align it to the NMC Future Nurse standards. We've also aligned it to the Mental Health Nurses Handbook to show that we've got that evidence that aligns it to, I think we've now got over 40 standards within the Future Nurse standards and 11 of the elements of the code to show that it can back that up. And now we're starting to develop a format for how that simulation would work. And thankfully, we're getting to the point now where I'm talking to people who've done work like this before and we're happy to help. And even talking to the head of simulation at the NMC, who's basically said, there is no problem with using this work in simulation. The key element is making sure that we have adequate supervision for students to make sure that it counts as supervision. And that's it, really. So I think we've now got a really exciting opportunity to kick on. Quite a few more universities now jumping in and saying that they're interested and want to talk about it. So it's exciting, scary, but yeah, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic with it.
Yeah, and well done for keep going, because I think you're absolutely right. You have to knock on a lot of doors and then all of a sudden it seems to come together a bit more, but you really have to stick in there. Dave, I think you had a few more things that you wanted to bring across.
Yeah, just Jane Fisher's made a comment. Have watched it twice. Amazing play. Well done, Peter. So many important issues addressed. For me, it was issues such as paternalism and coercion that came out. Vital for students to be challenged on this and how this is reflected in MH nursing practice. And by playing the main character, Pete puts his heart and soul into the performances. So a great review there. I think Guardian would call that a 5-star review. I suppose one of the questions I had was, it sounds like it's quite focused on mental health nurse education. I hate to say this, although Nicky has picked me of this in the past. I'm not a mental health nurse. And thinking about my own education at Manchester University as an adult nurse, one of the most impactful things I found about mental health education at the time was when one of my lecturers brought in headsets and a tape where you just put it on and listen to someone, as if you were listening to, hearing voices. And I can still remember that, and I trained quite a few years ago, and the impact that it had on me, then, and has kept that going. I think, it really kind of made me think about mental health in a different way as an adult nurse. So I suppose, has there any work been done to look at the parallels across the different fields of nurse practice, especially because we know that mental health nurses might be great at mental health, adult nurses might be great at adult physical health, but actually the two don't often cross over.
Yeah, I'll quickly do my bit, Mick. I feel like I've been talking a lot now, but I know Mick and probably Anna will have something to say on this as well. But first of all, we had student nurses from all 4 fields watch the play, and the feedback was equally positive. And what we were hearing was everyone needs to see this, and that's not me. I've got to kind of just say that rather than be falsely modest about it. That's what they're saying. They said it's important for all fields to see, and I think rather than just sort of saying, well, they've said it, so there you go. I think it's there is a mental health and probably LD focus within the play, but it's largely about choice of care. It's about paternalism. It's about, and it's opening up those conversations about, we accept now that person-centered care is the way forward, but why is that? Well, what do we have in absence of that? What happens when we don't commit to that? And that's applicable to all fields, not just in nursing, to all health professions. So that there are themes that cut right across all of health and social care, I think, in the play. And I think one last thing I will say, and this actually came up with a chat I had with the contacts I've got at NMC the other day, was that simulation leads should be looking at, there's a reason the NMC standards, I know it's controversial, there's a reason that they've been made non-field specific, that they are supposed to be seen as holistic, and that if mental health student nurses have to learn all the adult stuff, then it's equally important for adult CYP nurses to learn about mental health. We have to have that holistic approach to it, or we don't, Yeah, I'll get off the soapbox now and hand over to you, Mick and Anne.
You're right. Yeah. So yeah, I recall again from when I saw the performance that there was an adult nursing student in the audience who was really clear about the impact that it had on her, and really kind of advocating actually that this needs to be seen much more widely in terms of health. And I think that is also reflective of some of the things we've talked about around the issues that are within the play as well, which are really broadly applicable. Digital health, sort of support for carers, if you want to frame it like that, the impact of welfare, social context on health, all of those broader aspects are key. And I think we're really fortunate in kind of working with Pete to be looking at screening the play. So we're going to try it this year with paramedic students, which I think will be really interesting in terms of seeing the potential impact there. But I'm also going to say something controversial around, what I think it's really important not to lose within that is the different conversations that you might have with mental health students, which might take a slightly different pathway or avenue, particularly again around some of the stuff that Mick was talking about earlier around coercion, control, sort of stigmatization from the professionals themselves. Some of those have very specific application, I think, within a mental health context, and you wouldn't want to compromise a depth for breadth as well. So ideally, both is would make the most out of it, I think.
Okay.
I think you both said it fantastically. I've not got too much to add to that, but I do think there's something about, well, I'm going to go off piste anyway. I think it's this imagination, and I think the play captures every human being has got this capacity to be imaginative, and I think the play taps into that. And I think the irony is that, as Pete said, some of the people who have some responsibility in being gatekeepers for this sort of thing seem to lack some of that imaginative capacity, or less so than some of the people who've watched the actual play. But one of the things two things I wanted to say before we leave this is, we haven't said too much about the process by which the play has been made, and it's been very democratic. Long before anyone used the word co-production in the UK, that Pete was working this way in his craft of writing, and he's worked with so many people from all sorts of different backgrounds to refine what he's offered us in terms of this piece of theatre. And I think one of the last thing I'd want to say is one of the things that's really interesting about this is it's set in an imaginary future. But one of the big lessons from it is, hold on, we're doing this stuff now. It mightn't be to the same degree, but in essence, these ways in which people's autonomy and choice and everything is limited. And not just in mental health care. This happens in children's care, older people's care, all these sort of places, but maybe more so and done more legitimately with the power of the law behind it in mental health care. It's taken to extremes in the play to some extent, but it's not so dissimilar to what we're doing now. And I think that's, for me, one of the biggest sort of light bulb moments for these students. I've remembered what I want to...
Mick's computer has to reboot by people, and I feel really bad. It very much felt like he'd reached a crescendo of what he was going to say.
Sure, it was excellent.
It's very mental health. We've all found that quite funny. He's going to have to tweet it. Oh, is he coming back? Oh, you can't keep a good man down, can you?
He'll be on his phone. He's determined to make that point.
I know.
I can't believe we've let him back in. I can't believe it.
Mick, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but my Chrome decided to...
we've already explained, don't worry. You were about to say the really important thing, so you probably should say that.
No, it wasn't. It was just that we had an audience of people who were training to be social workers and nurses on the same course in Edge Hill. And one of the things that happened, I think, was for at least some of that audience, people were beginning to take professional sides and cut a different perspective on the play. And to some extent, there was an unfortunate aspect to that, in that it was felt that because social workers haven't got the hands-on responsibility for doing some of the dirty work in psychiatry, like coercion, there was an easy escape route to say, I'm going to be more of a social worker than a nurse, rather than bring those social work values into nursing necessarily. And I think that was a good launch pad for a deeper discussion around those sorts of tensions in those sort of dual identity courses, which may become more and more the future for education and for practitioners. So I think yes, and part of that as well is helping the nurse trainees not to feel demoralized because their discipline is held responsible for some of the things that go wrong. So can we do this learning in a way that's optimistic, hopeful? And I think that's in the play as well, I think,
That's really interesting. I think that idea about kind of clean hands is very interesting, I think, because if you're part of a system where this is happening, you're part of it. You can't get to sort of like just pop in and out and then it'd be fine.
No.
And that, I think there's a lot of moral distress in nursing.
Yeah, definitely.
Because of the good bits of like sort of psychology or those kind of like emotional positives being left in one place, and then the difficult things like saying, actually, you're not well enough to go home, being left with nurses. And that's really
maybe
interesting.
There's a way of doing all this stuff, isn't there? That makes for good nursing. And I think if we get into the politics of it, a good question I think is always who is the enemy? Are we the baddies? It's a good question to ask of ourselves. But also sometimes I think the enemy is elsewhere. We need to see that in the political economy and all of these sorts of things. But maybe that's for another day.
No, I think it's an interesting question to ask. And I think it comes back to exactly what we've been saying and what Pete's been saying about his work, is that it gives you space to start thinking about what's happening from 1 degree difference. And you see it completely different. That change of perspective suddenly opens up so many more questions.
That's it, exactly. I think in that sort of 2-hour period, it really prompts very quickly those big and deep questions. And as we were saying at the beginning, quite difficult to identify other methods that would get you to that point so effectively and so quickly in some respects.
I think we're coming towards the end now, so if we just do if anyone's got any last thoughts they want to definitely just discuss, or any points they want to make, now is the time. So I guess we should start with Pete, really.
Yeah, that's gone quickly. It's a good sign. Me. I hope everyone else has enjoyed that as much as I have. Yeah, that's been fascinating. I think, yeah, the final thoughts for me is just I'm really excited about where it's going, and if anyone's watching who is thinking I want to know how this might be, used in my workplace, not just in education, it can be used as CPD as well. If people are interested, please get in touch. I'm always excited to have chats with new people and see where we can take it, really. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I just think there's something about the huge opportunity that we've got, I think, with this as an example of the impact and influence of creative approaches within healthcare education. And because of who Pete is and how he's approached his work, that having that sort of connection actually across quite a few different universities across the network means we've got a real opportunity to perhaps both help expose a lot of students to this learning opportunity, but begin to look at how we can spread it and embed or bring back some of those creative approaches within education again.
Yeah, absolutely. Mick?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've loved the show and the chance to come on and talk about Pete and Pete's work, and this sort of general idea of can we be more creative with our education. And I think one of the things we started with was this idea that this stuff is moving, and we played with the idea of it moves us at this sort of effective level. It sort of touches our hearts and that sort of thing. But movement is also movement on this sort of political front as well, the ideas front. And I think where I'd like to leave it is the play is an excellent provocation for thinking about the bigger picture around mental health. And I sometimes think when we're stuck in it, whether it be that as staff or patients, it's often difficult to see over the horizon, to see what's really going on in terms of what's driving some of the more negative features that are in mental health services. and that can make us take the blame all on our own shoulders when it best lies elsewhere. So I one of my other missions is to wake nurses up to the fact that they could have some agency in challenging these sort of things. And one of the things I like about your TV show here is it's effectively sponsored by a trade union, and I think I'm such a big fan of trade unions, but I know, you know, our brothers and sisters in unions, we could do more. And this creative arts thing has a tradition in the labour movement as well. It probably reached its high point in the 1930s, but we could get that back. So
Mick, the 1930s are coming back. Hold your horses. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I definitely think that's true. Fantastic. Dave, is there anything you want to add to that? And who's on next week? Just to remind me.
Yes. So 2 very brief comments about tonight's episode. One is I feel a bit sad that I've not seen this play now. So I want to try and correct that at some point. And hopefully, Nicky, I'll be able to take you. I'd quite like a nice evening out with you.
We haven't been out.
The other thing, the other thing that I thought as well was it'd be probably a good one to offer to NMC Council, you know, and sort of say to them, you know, actually, you know, there's all these concerns about mental health practice and, you know, what mental health nurses of the future need to be able to do. And it sounds like, you know, maybe offering them the opportunity to watch it would be quite a nice kind of not solution, but, you know, part of the discussion. And then in terms of next week, I did just post you who it was, but now I've gone too far. So it's the Jabali Network, isn't it, Nicky? We've got some colleagues that are talking about their experiences. You know, that's what we're going to be discussing next week.
Fantastic. And thank you very much to our guests. A really interesting, exciting, and such an important discussion to be having about kind of putting the humanity into our education, because it seems like practice really knocks it out of people. So it needs to be something that's really firmly embedded, doesn't it? That empathy and that compassion for each other. So thank you very much for that. Brilliant session. Thanks all, everybody. Night. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Nicky. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.